Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and welcome to another RfRx session. My name is Amaia Perez. I am the online programming director, and I'm here with Eric Wells, who is the support group director and also your co-host today. So, Eric, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing good. Thank you for having me back as a co-host because, you can fire me at any time, and I really appreciate you not firing me. And at least, I know every week you kind of cut my salary down a little bit more, and it's just, I'm okay with that because I'm really happy to just kind of be here. So I'm doing good. Everyone, at the beginning of every RfRx, we have a poll, and today is no different. And I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll questions, and I'll read them in a minute. But these poll questions are kind of designed to get you in the mood, get you in the mindset, get you all warmed up for what we're going to be talking about today. So we've got 3 questions, and the first question is, have you been affected by shunning? And it's got a couple of answers. I live with a family who won't eat or speak with me. I have relatives that I'm not allowed to see. I encounter former friends daily and they won't speak to me. I've lost contact with friends and family members, or I haven't been affected by shunning. Question number 2 is, what have you found that helps you cope? First answer is joining a support group, psychotherapy with a knowledgeable practitioner. Third question or answer, I haven't found anything. D, trying not to think about it, and E is other. And the final question on our opening poll is, what gives you hope for your future? Number 1, I have found new friends. Number 2, I have found education/work that I enjoy. Number 3, I help others who have left controlling groups. And number 4 is other. So those are the poll questions. I'm going to have it running during our introduction here. I also want to welcome once again, like we do every week, the atheist community of Discord. We've got the ACD over there. So if you are looking for a community of like-minded folks to kind of hang out with and shoot the poop with and maybe make some new friends, you might want to consider checking out Discord. If you like Discord, if Discord's your thing. So we'll put a link to that in the description and in the chat. Maya, what's next? What do you want to talk about next?
Before I talk about that, I just want to ask about that expression that you said, the shoot the poop. What does that mean? How is that?
So there's a common expression like shoot the shit. Just as like where you gab at one another. I'm not exactly sure about what the origins are. And honestly, just the mental picture of shooting some shit is kind of like a weird mental picture. And so I cleaned it up some to say shoot the poop.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'll just have to Google it later in
Urban
Dictionary. Sorry.
This is fun stumbling across these weird idioms that you've never heard of, and I have to explain them. Oh my gosh. This is great.
I do apologize, Eric. And this goes on YouTube too, so that's always great. Anyway. Yeah, so let's go back to like the serious stuff. So RfRx, what is it that we do in RfRx? So RfRx is a series of online weekly sessions where we bring in guests to discuss different topics that may be relevant to anyone who has left religion or is interested in topics that affect people who have left religion. This is a way of providing good advice and coping skills to anyone who needs them right now. So if there is any sort of feedback, any topics that you want to see, any people that you want to see in the show, please send us an email to rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And if you want to watch any of our previous RfRx sessions, you should be able to find them in our YouTube channel. And that's youtube.com/recoveringfromreligion. Okay. So that's what we do in RfRx. But in RfR as a charity, we do a bit more varied, and that's definitely not pronounced right, but you know what I mean, work. And we have a mission statement, and that is that we offer hope, healing, and support to those who are struggling with issues of religion and unbelief. So I'm just going to explain healing to start with. So healing comes from our helpline, and you can contact our helpline agents via telephone call or chat. And it's basically a space where you can just speak to someone who has been trained to be able to actively listen to you about any sort of problems that you may have which are related to religion. This is completely confidential, 24/7 service, and it's just a great resource to use if you feel like you could really use like an understanding ear, just someone that can listen to your problems, basically. And we also have a resource page. And this resource page is basically a very large list of different articles, podcasts, books, movies, yes, any sort of format that you can imagine, you will find it there. And we have different topics, obviously, in the resource list, and you can find different resources according to your particular issue or your particular religion that you are maybe trying to leave or you have left completely, but you're still struggling to find piece in it. So yeah, definitely go to our resource page if you feel like this is something that you could use. And if you're watching this in our YouTube channel, all the links that we mentioned will be in the description box down below. Okay, now I've spoken for a while. Eric, do you want to explain support and hope and all those nice things, please?
I don't know. I want to keep hearing you keep talking. I mean, I've paid for the whole seat here, but I'm only using the edge of it. So I really want to just hear what you have to say. I love listening to your voice. If you could just I'm going to have my ringtone tone say, "Hello, my name is Amaia Perez." Or it's just amazing how you say your own name. I love it. But let's talk about hope here because it floats. So hope is when we provide hope through RfR, what we do is we provide the sharing and the listening of personal stories. So we're kind of all in this together. And if I am able to hear someone who shares their stories and it's something that I can relate to, something that maybe I've gone through or something very similar, and if I see that they get out of it or some of the emotions and struggles that they overcame can be inspiring, then it's something for me that I can possibly give me hope. Let me see the light at the end of the tunnel. If they can get through it, then I can get through it. And so we have a blog and a podcast where these personal stories are shared. So that's how we provide hope, is through the sharing of personal stories on our blog and on the podcast. We also provide support, and we have peer support groups. I'm the support group director, and I love the support group. The whole program that we've got, it's so fantastic. These are face-to-face meetings where the long-term healing really happens. We've got well over 50 groups around the world, and we're opening new ones up all the time, and hopefully near where you are right now. You can find the nearest one on our RfR website, and we'll get a link out there for you. But this is where there's a group of people, they come together, and right now it's all over Zoom, but they come together and it's a safe space to share some of the healing, the trauma, the things that you're struggling with, the success stories that you're having when overcoming things that have come out of your religious background. Or even the doubts and the questions that you have that you may not feel comfortable talking about within your community. This is a safe space for that kind of conversation. We've got fantastically trained support group leaders. They're just wonderful. So another form of support is professional mental health care. We talked about the helpline and we talked about the support groups, and those are both peer-based. Nobody's trained professionally. But with the Secular Therapy Project, the program that RfR created, we're able to connect the clients, folks like you and me, with professional mental health care providers. Now, these folks are carefully screened to make sure that they have the appropriate licensing in their state or the country, make sure that they maintain a secular practice, so you won't be sent home from a therapy session asking or just saying you need to pray more and you look at this verse or something like that. These they're vetted to make sure that they have a secular practice. And in addition to that, the final criteria that they're vetted on is to make sure they run an evidence-based practice as well. And you can connect with a local mental health counselor or therapist near you at seculartherapy.org. All right, what's next? What's next on the outline, Amaia?
So we also have the online community, which is basically an online platform in which you can chat with and meet people that share similar backgrounds as you. So we have in our Slack platform, we have different groups. Let's say that you are an LGBTQ person who wants to share your experience and hopefully learn from others who have the same experience as yourself, living religion. you can go to the LGBTQ plus group. We also have groups for ex-military people, for specific religions, for females only, for Australians. We have all sorts of different sorts of different groups. So I'm sure we will find one for you. And apart from these chats, they also hold Sunday night Zoom meetings. So that hopefully will bring like a more real connection. I feel like, especially in times of COVID, that can be really helpful. So if this is something that you feel like you could benefit from, I highly encourage you to contact one of our helpline agents, and then they will let you know what steps you need to follow in order to join one of these groups. And then the last thing before we jump to the actual RfRx session is just a mini advert about volunteering, because as I always say, volunteering has been such a blessing in my life. Obviously not religious blessing, but you know what I mean. In my life, I feel like it has definitely distracted me from all the awful things that have been happening in the last few months. And I couldn't be more helpful for the team of RfR for letting me do this every week. I feel like it's been such an amazing thing. And we have all sorts of different roles. So I am sure that we will find one for you. We have the researcher role, the helpline agent, the support group director. You could be an RfRx Hangout session host even. Like, there's so many different roles. So if you feel like you have some extra time that you want to spend on helping others, or if you feel like you want to develop any new skills that you maybe didn't know that you had, then I highly encourage you to join us in our volunteer group. And in order to do so, all you have to do is go to our volunteering page, and that is recoveringfromreligion.org/volunteer. And now let's jump to the actual RfRx meeting. So Eric, do you want to explain the structure, please?
You bet I do. So I talk about this every week, and this is kind of how the structure is laid out. For the first hour, we're going to bring on our guests, and we're going to talk about the topic. And during this conversation, you're probably going to have some questions and kind of want to know some additional things that may apply to you or some of your experience. And so you are more than welcome to add those questions into the chat, and we will collect them. So during this discussion, if you have a question, put it in the chat. You can either put it publicly or you can send it to us privately. And then during the second part of this discussion, we will have a Q&A section where we will be asking the folks, asking our expert those questions. After that, we're going to have a closing word from our fantastic board member, Gwen Bloggett. I'm excited to introduce you to her. And then once that's all wrapped up, we're going to have a hangout session. We're going to close down the recording and then kind of just hang out, and hopefully the guests can stay with us a little bit and answer some questions or what have you. But this is a time where during the hangout where we're able to just kind of get to know one another, kind of talk a little bit more intimately, and just hang out. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the project or about the topic at all, but usually it tends to stem from that. So without further ado, why don't you introduce our guest? Bring our guest on.
Definitely. So today we have Cathy S, and I'm just going to tell you a bit about her before she starts with the presentation. So Cathy is a clinical social worker with over 20 years of experience in a variety of settings, helping people get beyond traumatic experiences and onto their best life. She was recruited to a religious cult at 17 years old. At 43, she began to question this membership and left the group. And in spite of being shunned by family and friends, she has found a life that she loves. So, Cathy, thank you so much for being here, and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I do have a PowerPoint presentation. It's going to be on the subject of shunning. And within the presentation, I'm going to cover a little bit of my own story. I'm going to talk a little bit about what shunning is. And then I'm going to talk about what is something called trauma-informed care, which is a way of thinking and an approach that I use and have used my whole time of being a therapist. Then I'm going to do a little bit with how you can heal, and then a focus on something that I call mindfulness. It's not meditation. It's a pay attention kind of activity that I'm going to describe to you. Then I'm going to give you a few resources, and that'll be the end of the presentation. So the first part's a little bit about my own story. So about 50 years ago, actually, when I was 17 years old, it was 1970, there was lots of problems in the world, political problems, war, racial injustices, poverty. That's 50 years ago. And so when I was encouraged by my mother to get involved in a certain religion, it answered all those questions for me. And so that religion was Jehovah's Witnesses. My mother had been a Jehovah's Witness, but was excommunicated, shunned from the time I was a year old till I was about 17. So I was not raised with it, but I was raised with its influences. Looking back on it, I know that a lot of my mother's very negative, sad views of life were based on the religion, which I didn't know as a kid, of course, but I kind of figured all that out later. So I began to put on what they emphasize is the new personality, meaning I got rid of my mini skirts and my long hair, and I really conformed to the much more conservative dress. I was in Indiana at the time. I put away, I had 200 albums that would be worth a lot of money now. All my Beatle albums, my first edition Beatle albums, all my 300 Beatle trading cards and things like that. I just threw away. That was part of this process of kind of submerging myself, really. So one of my favorite sayings is, "Can a fish see water?" And when I think about that, I think about how I learned and recognized that I had actually been in what I now call a cult. That in, when I was almost 40 years old, I had dealt with depression most of my life, even when I was part of God's happiest people in that religion. And I had a suicide attempt and was in a hospital for about 3 weeks. And then I landed in Iowa, where my brother was. My brother was also in the religion and, of course, didn't understand what was going on with me. Going to college at 17 years old was not allowed. And I wouldn't have been interested at the time anyway, because I was so interested in following what they told me to do, which was go out preaching to people because the end of the world was so near. When I joined in 1970, it was imminent to me. It was like any minute, the end of the world. There are other people that had been in it all their lives that were older, that they were looking to 1975 because that was the year that the witnesses had put forth. Nonetheless, it was this sense of urgency. And so you don't do anything that would attract you, anything you might have passion for. So people, and this was very honorable work. I'm not judging this work, but until I was 40 years old, I cleaned houses and I did a lot of physical work. I worked in California at something called Price Club, which is now Costco. A lot of physical work. And people were always asking me at that job, especially what my degree was in. And I would say, I don't have a degree. So after the suicide attempt, I landed in Iowa where my brother was. And I decided I was going to try to get money from the government, which was something that was new to me. I found out about. And I decided I was going to try to go to college. And I was accepted into to Iowa State College. It's a science-based college or agriculturally based college. So I started out in psychology and I ended up doing a minor in psychology and my major in something called human development and family sciences. So they were a little bit more practical classes for me. So even though I was kind of in and out of therapy at the time, and I had a therapist when I decided to leave the group, I didn't really get any support there because she didn't know what to ask me. She didn't know where to go with it. She didn't understand that it was my life. I was going to lose my family, and all the supports that I had known. Now, what was good for me was in California, I had hundreds of friends, people that were truly family to me. When I moved to Iowa, the congregation was very small, filled with much older people. And I made one friend who ended up leaving the group when I did as well. When I was in school, I used my classes really to do my own work. I had come from a family that was steeped in alcoholism and some other things in the background, a lot of trauma. And it began to make sense to me to kind of put those dots together with my suicide attempt and my joining that religion in particular and being so, faithful for as long as I was. And so going to college was kind of my therapy, and that's not for everyone. And I don't think there's one answer for anyone. But for me, that was a real answer. It came at a real critical time in my life. And about 2 years into it, I thought I would not even finish a 4-year degree because Armageddon was going to be there so soon, right? But of course it didn't come. And for the first 2 years, I was still trying to go to the meetings. I was very in turmoil about it. And so I love reading, and being in a big state university, had huge libraries, and I ran into a book called The Orwellian World of Jehovah's Witnesses, written by a couple, a man who I think he's in his 80s now. He became a professor in Canada. He and his wife were ex-witnesses, and they wrote a book paralleling much of what goes on in that group to the things that happened in the story of 1984. So I had never read the book or seen the movie. So as I read The Orwellian World of Jehovah's Witnesses, I began to recognize that I could no longer stay in this group and keep personal integrity. Can a fish see water comes in, because that was an alien thought. You're not taught to think in terms of yourself individually. Your integrity is all about giving a witness to God's name, and everything you do is watched. I'll talk about this a little more later, but Jehovah, the God that's worshipped there, became to me like a boyfriend that I loved, who was always waiting to catch me doing something wrong. Because the Watchtower Society, which is the organizational entity of the witnesses, they put forth information in their publications that really gets into every aspect of a person's life, where you can and can't work, what kind of sex you can have with your husband, what kind of not so much food or diet. You can drink alcohol, but you're not supposed to get drunk, of course. They're just every aspect of life was covered. And so when I began to think in terms of, I can't stay in this and keep personal integrity, it was shocking to me. And I spent many, many nights while I was still going to college and raising my son, who was a person on the autism spectrum. He was 14 at the time, 14 and 15. And a lot was going on, a lot of pressure, but the religion had always been my foundation for comfort, because I had many friends. I still had lots of friends I called in California and so forth. So anyway, the whole can a fish see water, it was just like I began to read about what a cult really was. I had accepted what they told me was a cult, and of course it was everything but us. And then when I read what Lifton's 8 criteria were for cults, it was like, oh my gosh, I've been in a cult. It was shocking. And so for about 3 months, I was extremely depressed again. And fortunately, I had this one friend who left at the same time I did. She had adult children in it, so she kind of faded away without declaring herself. After about 6 months, I declared myself to the local congregation and said, I don't want to be known. Now, my brother, who did not live near me and I didn't have much contact with at the time, never asked me, never contacted me, never asked me why I left. And this is what I see what many of my clients now deal with, that their families, they won't own up to the shunning, but they do it. It's very, what we call crazy making, it's gaslighting. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about what shunning is. Anybody that's here, I would assume they probably have some experience with it, some knowledge of it, or maybe some fear of it if they're thinking about leaving a group that does practice shunning.
But yeah, I've heard the topic of shunning, coming back and back again with many different religious groups, not just Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right.
And right. I think I was telling Eric earlier today that I think it's one of the most hurtful practices that a religion can do, because they basically leave you without any community, without any base to go back on, and that's just extremely painful. So thank you so much for being the
right. And if it's absolutely my pleasure. Yeah, and if a person is 3rd or 4th generation and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, they don't have any friends outside the group, or and if they do, those folks really don't understand. For my group, if I share with anyone that new that I meet, they go, "Oh, they're such nice people." I go, "Yeah, I really miss those nice people, but there are a lot of things that go on there that are not okay." So I'm going to flip through. These are the first few slides. This is me at 17. This was my persona at 17, which was no longer allowed. My favorite saying, can a fish see water? So one of the things I wanted to focus on when I learned Lifton's criteria, one of the things that really, really hit me and meant a lot to me was this whole doctrine over person, dogma, or teaching over experience. which can be distilled down to when your facts don't match our truth, your facts are wrong. And so, in other words, I think this is what cognitive dissonance is. When the teachings start to conflict with what I experience, if I listen to my experience, there's cognitive dissonance. I'm going to question this. Now, for 26 years, I just submerged my experience. And it's not the kind of group that you're told to get into your body and be integrated, or there's nothing along those lines, which is a lot of what I talk to people. I work with people with what are called dissociative disorders, people who are extremely in parts and separated from themselves and don't have, connection to themselves. So anyway, this one became very, very important to me. And I'm going to talk a little bit more later about how this figures in my work as well as in my life. So this is where I went to school, and this is the Orwellian World of Jehovah's Witnesses, which is out of print, but you can get it on Amazon. Now, this is one of my favorite sayings from a song I really like by a group called Filter. Could everyone agree that no one should be left alone? Saying Amaia. This is one of the worst things that can be done to a person, is to take them away or kick them out of their support groups, where there's lots of good scientific research now that shows that whatever a person is dealing with, if they have support and community, they're going to be they're going to get through it. And we hear this a lot right now during COVID. This is a girl who shared this on Pinterest, and it sounds like she's an ex-Jehovah's Witness. I'm not real sure, but she says, "You told me I was going to die in Armageddon, that I was doomed because I lost faith in my religion. You said I was now living in darkness and evil, that I'm no longer a daughter or a friend, but a thing now lost to the devil. Do you think your words of damnation and shunning will make me see your God of love?" And because this is what they're told it's tough love. I shunned in 1977. I had about 50 friends that left the religion here out in San Diego, and I shunned them like I was supposed to, and I thought I was being loving until I got a different view of it.
So just as a curiosity, how do people in that cult justify shunning as loving? Is there like a rationale behind it, or is it just...
Oh yes, they have a couple of scriptures that they use, and they have a whole rationale that help the person come back to the truth. But of course, people like me, which are called apostates, I don't believe the teachings anymore, they never come back. And so thus I'm worse than in their eyes than a murderer or a child molester, because those people might repent, and come back. So that's what happened with my mother. My mother came back into it after 17 years. She had to write a letter. They always have to write a letter saying, "I won't do the bad thing I did to get kicked out." Well, really, you wouldn't marry the person you've been married to for 15 years now? So it really holds to impossible standards. A book that I use with a lot of my clients, not just ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, is this one called Shunned, A Survival Guide by Zieman, who is an ex-Jehovah's Witness. She's a retired therapist, and she's written it. I love it because it's a survival guide. It's one thing to recognize how much this hurts a person and how much it affects their life. But, my thing, I met people online, strangely enough, 25 years ago, and in some very primitive talk rooms. They weren't even really chat rooms. But I met some ex-people from the religion. They were from the Netherlands, I think. And they'd been in it, they were like third or fourth generation. So they grew up in it. They had been what was called regular pioneers and special pioneers, meaning they spent 150 hours a month going door to door on their own dime. And these people were so angry. These people were so angry and so vengeful, and spending as much time then trying to get people out of it as they used to try getting people into it. And so I decided I wasn't going to get stuck in any of those places, that I was going to let myself have my anger and my sadness about all of it, but not get stuck in regret. So I'm kind of all about practical means, because I didn't have anything like this when I was going through it. There just wasn't anything. There were no Facebook groups. There were no RfR. There was nothing like that. So shunning is something that's been practiced back to primitive times. If anybody's ever read the series called Clan of the Cave Bear, the little main character is excommunicated from the tribe she is in when she's 13 years old. And of course, in the story, she goes off and lives in a cave and survives all that. But people don't always survive when they are put off in caves, metaphorically. So this was done in ancient Athens and in Greece. This was often as a way of neutralizing someone who's a threat to leaders. There's something that's practiced in Bali, where people are shunned by their community or maybe even the entire families. But in these cases, it's usually time limited. And in many of these religions, it's not. Like, and some of the religions, they have different levels. Like the Mormons have different levels of excommunication. The Amish, it's kind of a one-time thing, but it's a little fuzzier than what the witnesses do. And then there's a whole spectrum if you want to think about it. A restraining order is kind of a shunning of a person for good reason. Court injunctions, and people who use AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, which I'm in respect of. My joke is I'm not a born-again member of anything anymore, though. So I do encourage some people to use that if it doesn't fit for everyone. But it's one reason when people kind of have this us versus them attitude in that kind of a support group, that can be difficult for someone who's been in a cult and they're experiencing shunning. There are a lot of things about those groups that can be difficult. And then, of course, we get into, there have been court cases. There have been people from my group, my ex group, that have died because they were a disabled person and their family left them to live in a little cabin out in the snow in Ohio or Idaho where they had no heating and no food and no support, and people have died. And so there are civil rights issues. Out here in California, we have a law that grandparents have rights to see their children, because this is something that happens a lot. If an older person decides to leave, then their adult children won't let them see their grandchildren. I've tried to help people with that many times. It's a really, really difficult one for people to deal with. If you want to hear any more of my story, I meant to mention it is on my website and in the page regarding cults. So my website is cited here at the bottom of the slides. So there are many factors that influence how people react to shunning. And I like this cult. This is a book published by ICSA, the International Cultic Studies Association. It says those who leave a cult without understanding how the cult's deceptive manipulative techniques change them tend to be plagued by doubts and symptoms longer than those who gain such understanding. So one of the things I often do with my clients people who come to me for help with this, is we go through Lifton's criteria. And I hope everybody knows what I mean by Robert Lifton's 8 criteria. If you go and Google that, you'll get these. And it's 8 criteria that he kind of identified after studying brainwashing techniques. So I have people go through these one at a time and then journal or talk to me about how they experienced whatever that criteria was in their group. And so here's some other factors that I've seen in working with clients for 20 years now. That if a person, and many times, unfortunately, this is the case, there's been physical and sexual abuse in the family. So the person has that underneath, so to speak, the trauma experience and then the trauma of leaving and being shunned. There's a big difference sometimes whether the person walked out, left freely, or they were kicked out, excommunicated. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later too. If they have family members still active in the group, of course, that makes it more difficult. If they can gain other support, like I said, there was no therapy. I did, for my master's program, I did a survey, and I did have some places online that I was able to put it out there, asking people who had been in the witnesses what they had used for healing and for moving on. And nobody said therapy or group support, because there wasn't too much around at the time. Whether or not they've established a satisfying new life, whether they have what for my ex group is called Armageddon angst, when things get really bad. As I mentioned 50 years ago, when I joined the witnesses, I was compelled to do so because of the political situation, racial injustice, poverty, all the bad things that were going on in the world that are still going on now. When a person has, been indoctrinated with this idea that means we're in the last days and that means Armageddon's here, then you get a little anxious when these things are happening. Now, I haven't had that for about 10 years, but this is one of the things that'll be hard for people. I've gotten calls when COVID hit. I've gotten calls from people that I've worked with for a couple of years, and they were doing fine, and they're calling me now, and they get, what if they're right? What if they're right? And that's something that will really hold people back, and really the shunning / shaming aspect of shunning will really affect them. And then I'm going to talk about something I call IBS and AAI, internalized blame of self and ambivalent attachment. These are just a couple of terms and concepts that I work with my clients, whether they have cultish experience or just trauma. I work with people with all kinds of traumas, military and civilian. So my approach and a movement that's been happening around the world. I hope some of you have heard about this, not only in the medical and mental health communities, but in judicial settings and policing, schools, you name it. This approach has been put forth, and it's called trauma-informed care. So this is my definition. Trauma-informed approach is founded on compassion and a recognition that all humans experience trauma. It requires a paradigm shift that includes a change of attitude and a change of heart for those who have been trained in the purely medical model. Trauma-informed approach recognizes that all humans possess strengths, and as survivors have demonstrated strength or courage with resiliency. Victimization must be acknowledged and validated, but individuals' assets are utilized in an empowerment process. And in my view, if these principles are engaged, then every human action that you ever have can be enhanced. I don't know if you've ever heard of nonviolent communication, but that's something that I'm very much a proponent of. To me, it's an elevated version of cognitive behavior therapy. So, and then the trauma-informed thinking or trauma-informed care really conflicts, I would say, to the purely, what I call the purely medical model. The medical model that's developed, especially in the U.S. for mental health, has been very medicalized, and it's all about medication as treatment. And we've learned that that's just not helpful. I know that if I had been approached by a doctor the first time I was put on antidepressants in my early 20s or mid 20s, and said, "Hey, what's your social history? What have you experienced in your life?" and help me connect some of those dots, I probably wouldn't have stayed in a cult so long. But I don't live in regret. So these are the two concepts I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start with internalized blame self. This is just a coping defense that happens in childhood, and it's, in my view, again, this is all my view, it's the root of shame in adulthood. So these are some things that clients that I've worked with have said about it once it clicked for them. One says, the anxiety without a cause I'm constantly walking in. Or the reason I started calling it IBS is because one client said to me, it's a lot of shit to deal with, once they started noticing how often they were doing this to themselves. And so I had been looking for a different term for it than the one that the doctor I trained with uses. And I went, oh, IBS, internalized blame of self, and it's a lot of crap to deal with. So another one says it's the veil of darkness I carry with me. So it's a key theme in trauma and ex-cult work. And a couple of writers that I've followed for quite a long time. One is Dr. Eduardo Duran. He's a Native American psychologist who worked in many reservations and tribal settings, especially in California, for about 40 years. He says, never underestimate internalized racism. People can be oppressed, yet continue to express, that's Susan Morris, sorry, I'll read that one, express their oppression in their own choices. So for the African American community, it's called internalized racism. Dr. Eduardo Duran calls it internalized oppression, and he thinks it's the root of all addiction, divorce, domestic violence, you name it, and I would tend to agree with him. So for me, it explains the self-blame and the low self-esteem and self-sabotage of survivors of any kind of trauma. Every therapist, when they have somebody sitting in front of them that has gone through difficult things, every therapist knows to exercise compassion, go, oh, it wasn't your fault, for you. On the other hand, I want to go, why do I think it was my fault? Why, when we get hurt by someone, do we, especially when we're children, why do we think it's our fault? So for me, understanding this concept and how it shows out can help us increase in compassion and patience for ourselves. Now, for cult survivors, understood in the light of human imperfection, can help survivors understand their difficulties with compassion. So any kind of Christian-based group, you're a sinner that needs redemption. And that just ties right into this natural defense that we all have. I'm bad, I'm wrong, I don't deserve good. You're hurting me, it must be my fault. And I'm going to explain why we think that way. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how this affects people who've been in cults. So again, this concept of sin reinforces it. You're in a moral fail because you're an imperfect human. When people leave, if they're telling I'm just a loser, I'm an apostate, I'm a sinner, I'm a fallen one, or backslider, all of that says I'm bad, I'm wrong. So especially individuals raised in groups are integrated with this because they're given the responsibility of saving and recruiting others. The witnesses are now baptizing children as early as 8 years old, which is something they used to really criticize the Catholic Church for baptizing babies. How could you possibly know at 8 years old what you want when you're 22 years old? And then what's put on you, and of course this is put on kids in that group from their birth, because you're going out door to door with your mom in a stroller from time you're 2 or 3 weeks old. And so this integration of I'm responsible for saving people. So you go door to door, and if people don't respond, that it's because I'm not doing it right, or I'm not doing it good enough. And then this use of shame creates a trauma bond between individuals in the group, and then between the individual and the group as a whole. So it's used developed as a coping skill, and it's a helpful defense as a child, but in adulthood, it gets in our way with self-sabotage, shame. It can drive, like I said before, addiction and behavior that we don't want in our lives, that we don't know how to change because this gets in the way. We have this belief that I'm bad, I'm wrong. It's the foundation of recovery, however, in the work that I do. It empowers people, and also it helps people feel they're making progress. Because one of the things, once people start to understand this concept, I ask people, just start paying attention to how many times every day you're putting yourself down or calling yourself a derogatory name. That is a manifestation of this. So on the other hand, it can make us stay in childlike thinking. So the whole reason this develops is because when I'm a child and my brain's not fully developed, well, it's all about me. Everything's all about me. And adults who don't process through this in ways that don't work very well in adult relationships make it all about them. They get called very ugly names that I don't like. So this is a form of magical thinking. I cause everything in my world to happen when I'm a little kid. This is Piaget, who was a French psychologist, I guess. Yeah, basically studied children, and he noticed this. He called it egocentrism. So little kids say cute things like, it's raining because I'm sad. Well, is that really why it's raining? No, they don't understand science, right? They don't understand the bigger world. In other words, like this says, the outside world is linked with the child's internal consciousness. If you're hurting me, it must be because I'm bad. Oh, I'm bad, so you hurt me. And especially, again, in a cult where circular reasoning is used so much, that fits right in too. You're saying I'm a sinner, I need redemption. I'm a sinner, so it just keeps going, circular reasoning. So children's brains are not fully developed. Our brains aren't fully developed till we're in our early 20s, according to some research. So they believe they're the cause of all events that are happening. But then surviving adults stay with this thinking. They resort to this magical thinking in many, especially relationship issues, in order to gain a sense of control. Because we're going to talk now about how this develops and what it gives us. So if Mary's 4 years old or so, and she hears her parents fighting every night, and she hears mommy or daddy yell at mommy, "You're home with her all day. Why is your room so messy?" And then one day, mommy takes her home from preschool and says, "Daddy's not going to live with us anymore." What does she think? Right? It's my fault. Room is messy. Okay. Is that really why the adults are splitting up? No, of course not. The adults have adult problems that the child can't possibly understand. But now she's devastated because her daddy's gone. And she does not have the capacity to deal with those feelings. And the adults around her, even in healthy families, may not have the wherewithal and the time and everything that's needed to put enough attention on her to help her deal with this. What this does for us, because now she goes in her room and looks around and says, maybe if I clean my room up good enough, right, daddy will come back. So she's taking responsibility for adult actions. And that gives her some hope. It gives her a sense of control. It's an illusion of control, but we need that as humans. And so she starts then to believe that she can control people and environments with her actions. Now, what are you told when you're in a cult and you're going out door to door, for instance, or witnessing to other people? That you can win their heart over. I kept some old witness literature just to kind of refresh my memory on some things I'm writing. And the literature is all full of this. It's all full of you can persuade people. And number one, you don't have the right to do that anymore. Number two, it doesn't work that way. I tell my clients, I can't do your work for you. I can't breathe for you. I can't do your work for you. I can be a support. I can give you education. I can help you have a safe place to process things. I can't do your work for you. So back to Mary. And it becomes all about resources. And I'm going to say what I mean about that. As a little child, all we have is magical thinking. So even when it's kind of normal situations like our parents getting divorced, that's where we're going to go. Now, if somebody's hurting me and telling me I'm a brat, that's going to even more integrate this idea to me. So an adult, on the other hand, they have all these opportunities in most cases. Now, there are some communities and some places around the world where people don't really even have these resources. But I'm talking about, the world that most of us probably know here. We have all these other resources. We can go get an education. We can get a job. We can go spend money or overspend money if we so choose. We have the physicality. We can, when you're 5 years old and someone's, 6 foot is hitting you, you can't stand up to them and walk out the door and say, hey, this is you, not me. You can't do that. You don't have social connections. Your brain, again, is not developed, and you don't have any legal recourse. You can't go out and sign a contract and rent an apartment and go live somewhere else until mommy and daddy get fixed. So all the child has is magical thinking. Now, the problem is that when people become adults, even if they've used these resources, because I've highly professional people on this issue, they have used resources, but they don't recognize that they've been using those resources. And their language is full of, I'm deprived, I don't have. And so part of the work then as an adult is recognizing. Again, it gives this illusion of control, because by trying to clean the house good enough, clean my room good enough, be sexual enough, pretty enough, funny enough, make enough money when I'm an adult, maybe my parent will love me. And this is one thing that people have to learn about this, is that your dad's problems weren't about you, but they really affected you. So now you have this baggage to deal with, but no amount of, I've worked with people who have 3 master's degrees, all in an attempt to get their father's attention. And it doesn't work like that, because dad has some problems he's not working on. So on the other hand, unfortunately, it does lay a foundation for a lifetime of thinking I'm not good enough. And then that comes through in choices and behavior. Again, it doesn't work well in adult relationships. Grown-up Mary relies on her magical thinking rather than become aware of the many adult resources she now has. She often responds to adult situations with immaturity, exhibiting a self-centered, helpless personality rather than empowered identity. And my belief is that people are doing the best they can and only trying to get their needs or their perceived met. Sometimes people haven't learned the socially acceptable ways to do those things, especially if people are raised in a cultish group. So from I'm bad, I must be causing you to hurt me, the child reasons, if I'm good enough, maybe you won't hurt me. Again, gives the child something to do, helps her avoid all those devastating feelings, and gives her a sense of control. The adult says, if only I hadn't left the house when I did, I wouldn't have gotten into a car accident. Or when I was in Iowa, there'd be a tornado and somebody's house would be flattened, and you'd see them on the news that night. And they'd be saying, oh, if we only had built our house in that field and not in this field. So it fits in with that woulda, coulda, shoulda thing that we all do. We can't go back and change the past. So this is where some things like radical acceptance can come in, as well as self-compassion. Now, on the other hand, when victimizers and leaders say, you made me hurt you because you're this or that, or you're a sinner, or I see the darkness in you, or whatever, they reinforce this illusion that the victim could prevent the abuse by being good enough in some way. So this is just some more of what the purpose of it is. It gives this illusion of control. It's a coping defense. And the primary reason we do it is to avoid bad feelings and to give us a sense of control. So here's some of the long-term effects. We continue to have cognitively distorted ways of thinking and an inability to recognize our adult resources. We should on ourselves a lot. Shoulding on ourselves is not really helpful. It's like scolding ourselves, and it doesn't work. Self-sabotage can create a vicious cycle of reinforcement of this irrational magical thinking. I'm bad. I don't deserve good. See, I'm just a sinner. Satan's out in my group, if you did well, that means Satan's blessing you. And of course, you didn't want that. And if you didn't do well, then Satan see the world is a bad place. So you're between a rock and a hard place. And so when you're carrying this self-sabotage thing with you, it all fits in with that. See, I'm just bad. People who relapse with alcoholism or drug use. I'm just an addict. I'm just a drunk. That's part of how this manifests. So sometimes people unconsciously seek out relationships and job situations, for example, that prove the truth of their low self-esteem. And the close survival will experience confusion at times, thinking maybe they were right about me once they're out of the group.
You are nailing so much of this on the head. Like, I didn't feel like I grew up in the cult, but I can definitely see a lot of these roots of the magical thinking I had as a child.
Mm-hmm.
This is scary stuff for me.
Good news is you can fix it.
But the thing too is, like, I have been a non-believer for 10 years now, and some of this stuff is the first that I've seen and been able to make that like mental connection between my actions now. Oh my gosh. And who I was as a kid. And who I was as a kid. This is amazing.
Yes. We all have this. We all do this. So in the trainings I do with therapists on this concept, I use a clip from Mrs. Doubtfire. If you remember that movie with Robin Williams. And he's kind of the ne'er-do-well. Yes. So he's kind of the ne'er-do-well. The mom who's the breadwinner comes home and the pony's in the house eating the cake and dad's jumping on the furniture with the kids. And mom's had it. She wants a divorce. They even sit the kids down and say, this isn't your fault. They do the right things, right? That movie's not about abuse. The next day, dad's leaving. The kids follow him down, and the boy comes over to him and says, I'm sorry, Dad, it's all my fault. I shouldn't have had a birthday. Oh. So this is what we all try to do. We try to control things, and we think that we're at fault for things that we couldn't possibly be at fault for. The problem is, as adults, when we're focused on taking responsibility for things that aren't ours, we often don't take responsibility for things that are ours. So this is why I call this IBS. Exactly what you're saying, Eric, is that it's a lot of shit to deal with once you recognize how ingrained it is and how much it comes up. But the good news is it can change. And so I love this little silly Disney movie, Inside Out, and I like how they depict all these emotions. This a lot of people call it low self-esteem. I call it IBS or shame. It drives anxiety, depression, our ability to grieve our losses, our ability to appropriately and safely express anger, and it gets in the way of joy and success and fulfillment in a lot of different ways. The next part here is ambivalent attachment issues. Dr. Dan Siegel is one of my heroes in this world. He talks quite a bit about, attachment. But one of the, I'm going to first share these with you. These are two different quotes. Resources will be at the end. Ambivalent attachment is a form of insecure attachment characterized by inconsistent responses of the caregivers and by the child's feelings of anxiety and preoccupation about the caregiver's availability. Adults feel insecure within the relationship. They're always worried they're going to be rejected, always preoccupied with the relationship. I think their partner is going to abandon them. So people have abandonment issues. My answer for abandonment is adults can't be abandoned because they have resources. People go, oh, you're a therapist. I can't believe you said that. It's like, I don't mean you can have feelings of abandonment, but I'll ask you to ask yourself when you're having those feelings, how old do you feel? And people will always say, I feel like I'm 5. I feel like I'm 8. Because that's when those things happen. And as an adult, we have resources because abandonment is about being left with nothing. And this is what happens on the other hand with shunning. Because if you're third or fourth or generation or whatever, your whole life has been this group and they have dictated whether you can get a college education and if you can make a decent living and all, and who your friends can be. And then they kick you out and shun you, you are abandoned. And whatever childhood feelings of abandonment you have, which we all do, those are going to be strongly triggered. So that's my other little caveat on abandonment, because sometimes people get really upset with me that I say that. So So here's some ways that.
Kathy, can you remind us again what IBS stands for?
Sure. Internalized blame of self.
Perfect. Perfect.
or
Yeah, there's a
self-blame
couple
for
of folks who
coping.
came in like, all right.
Sure.
That's, oh my gosh, you're just like driving me nuts. Like, Cathy, you're a fantastic speaker.
Oh, thank
And
you.
it's such, like, so many great speakers do this every single time. They like bring us down into this valley of depression, and then they bring us out of it. And I'm
Yeah,
like right now in this valley of depression, and I'm
okay. Well, in a minute, I'm going to pull you out of the mud. We'll see.
oh, awesome.
You're going to pull you out of the mud. All right. So some of the adult effects of what we call ambivalent. Now, and let me to start with talking about ambivalence. Sometimes people confuse ambivalence with ambiguous. Ambivalence is I have strong feelings on both sides of this, whatever this is. And so there's a book called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. And I say, I love you, now go away. That really demonstrates this push-pull thing we get. And again, we all get it a little bit because when we're little kids, even in very healthy, good enough parenting, nurturing families, we have to learn no. And so whenever anyone says no, it feels like a rejection. And so we all have this a little bit, but most people grow through it and are able to establish stable relationships and have trust in relationships and so forth. However, in a cultish group and in what we call traumagenic families, those things are, this is more extreme. Here's how this shows up with some ex-cult members. So it's hard for a person to conceive what we call a dialectic. I'm in a relationship with you. Wait, I'm mad at you, but I'm not going anywhere because, hey, if you're mad at me, it means I'm bad. So maybe you're going to disfellowship me, or maybe you're going to leave me. However they saw parents handle those things in their families, and then in their group. If their group practices an excommunication process with shunning, then that threat is always hanging in the air. I actually had a quote that I wanted to read about that. A little video that I watched of an ex-witness who had just terrible family experiences. Oh, there it is. She said, Jehovah's Witness kids grow up knowing that if they ever mess up, their parents will leave them, and that's scary because that is what happens. I have had many clients who, when they're 14, 15, 16, they're doing some normal experimenting with sex or drugs or alcohol or whatever. And because they're baptized then and their father's an elder, so people are not allowed to, 14, 15 years old, those very formative years, people aren't allowed to eat with their families. Because there's some scripture that says don't even eat with such a one. That's how they apply it. They're not supposed to go to college or anything like that. So very often, even in recent times, these people are out on the streets when they're 16 years old. And I've worked with a couple people who just by will and grit and other worldly, what we called worldly people helped them. And they were successful, but very successful in business, not so much in relationships sometimes. When I was in my master's program for my social work degree, I was required to read a book by Ken Wilber, who's a transpersonal therapist, quite an interesting person. And the book, I don't even know if this is what he meant, but it helped me so much because of the way I ended up applying it. He had a concept he called transcend and include. So I realized, because I do think that joining a group like the Witnesses, and I bought into the morals at the time, probably saved my life. Because of what I shared at the beginning, I truly was going to go, I would be in prison or dead, most likely, by my own hand or someone else's, or not knowing how to make bombs properly. I don't know. I would not have been here. And so, and I learned how to, I create, I grew a work ethic and learned how to have friends to some extent and so forth. And so what his concept is that we're all on kind of an evolutionary ladder of our own, so to speak. And as we go up each rung, we can decide to keep things from those rungs. We don't have to totally regret and reject everything that came before. And that was a very useful concept to me at the time. And it helped me deal with some of the anger, and it helped me just kind of move on and to recognize that I was probably a pretty cool person. And part of it was my experiences in that group. I didn't attribute who I am to the group. But I did attribute that I'm probably not a full-on alcoholic, addict, or dead from joining some kind of rigid group like that. When we go through, we start having this cognitive dissonance. And for me, I said it's like when my experiences, when I start to give more credence or more weight to my experiences versus the group's teachings. That's what started happening for me. I flipped it. Then you have this loyalty thing, and it's the same families. If I've grown up in a very traumagenic family and there's been a lot of abuse there, but that's still my family and there's been some good times and so on, I'm going to have ambivalent feelings or mixed feelings. And if I start in therapy to challenge, even mentally and emotionally, the things that they taught me about life, it's going to challenge my loyalty to them. And it can show up in somatic, it can show up in the body, in somatic headaches, stomach aches, all kinds of things that can happen for people. So especially when you leave a religious cult, any kind of cult really, because loyalty and being loyalty is paramount. And when you begin to not be loyal, so a lot of times people kind of do this, they go way off. I mean, I've worked with lots of people who got way into alcohol and drugs when they left their group. Or people do something we call snapping, and they join another religion that's very much like the one that they left, which is something that I've seen happen a lot. So the threat of shunning stops the thought process. Okay. So right now, the witnesses are under microscope around the world because they have covered up sexual abuse of children so much. And so what they say to people at their meetings is all those people are apostate liars. So when you can label the outsider now as bad and apostate liar, it cuts off going, yeah, but that's my brother and I miss him. It cuts that all off. And you don't think beyond what those authority figures told you. And so when you start kind of being aware of your ambivalence about all of it, it challenges that. If you're not, or if you turn away from being aware, which I tried to do for a couple of weeks, you stay stuck in indecision, anger, and regret. Your eyes cannot be, closed to things they've been open to. So I'm not going to play this, but I invite you, anybody that wants to go listen to this. This is a woman who was a poet. She's deceased now, but I'm going to read. This is just half of it. I'm an emotional idiot, so get away from me. I mean, come here. Wait, no, that's too close. Give me some space. It's a big country. There's plenty of room. Don't sit so close to me. Hey, where are you? I haven't seen you in days. What are you, having an affair? Who is she? Come on. So you can see in that the push-pull of relationship. It goes on. It gets funnier. If a person is, I have a dark sense of humor, so there is a little bit of profanity in it. So here's some of the ways that it develops. We all have to attach to survive in childhood. We have to attach physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever you want to as being. I'm not going to define it right now. Have to attach to survive. Children die without being held, without attachment going on. So our survival is paramount as humans. So we attach. Now, when you put that all in with a group membership and you're threatened with shunning, if you express yourself and have a different view than the group or do something they don't approve of, you're going to have what we call an ambivalent attachment. Because, like I said, for me, the last 10 years I was in my group, I think I was mentally starting to leave it. I couldn't let myself hear my doubts and my fears about the group. For the whole last 10 years I was in it, I think. So a child and then group members who are often told to be child, right? You're God's sheep. I happily forget most of the scriptures, but there are a lot of them are bent toward your children, right? So you think of yourself as a child, and you're not equipped to make these big decisions for yourself. So they can't rationalize this polarity, and so they develop this push-pull style of attachment. Now, Dr. Dan Siegel, like I said, is it okay if I go for about 10 more minutes?
Yeah, I think 10 more minutes is going to be fine.
Okay. All right. So can you hear this?
Now, in people with ambivalent attachment histories, what you see there is if I'm feeling hungry and my internal state is hunger and I cry out of hunger and you're my mom and you see that I'm hungry, but you yourself have a very anxious, ambivalent history and you really doubt your capacity as a mom. So you come to me seeing I'm hungry, really wanting to feed me, but being terrified of that you're not going to be able to do it, and nervous and concerned and doubting your ability, and you come with all this anxiety inside of you that I'm just hungry, but now you're feeling anxious. So my mirror neurons, which probably should be called, sponge neurons, is really what it is. I'm not really going to so much mirror you as sponge in, just soak in your internal state. So I sponge in what's going on in you. I'm hungry, but now since you're feeling anxious, I'm feeling anxious. There's no reason for me to have your anxiety, but because you have unresolved issues, you have leftover garbage, I pick them up. My sense of self then becomes very confused. All I know is, as a 2-month-old, 3-month-old, year-old.
He finishes it up there with talking about, all I know is that I'm hungry. I love him because he has a way of explaining these things without condemning anyone. He's done family work with trauma issues with families for 40 years. And so there's even research that links what he just described to eating disorders. Because in that attachment process, yes, again, I'm a social worker, not a scientist, so I love the science, but I can't regurgitate it quite as well as scientists can. But nonetheless, we have these mirror neurons. And like you said, the sponge neurons, because we just soak up the energy of our parent. And so if we get this kind of ambivalent, and what he described there was rather benign. If you have a person who's abusive and neglectful, this is going to be extreme for people. And then you get in these groups where it is extreme. Again, I described Jehovah, my God at the time, as my boyfriend who I loved and who loved me, but was always waiting to catch me doing something bad. So, think about that. So here are many of the ways that I use to help people in reversing internalized blame of self and healing ambivalent attachment. It can take some time. It doesn't take 20 years, but it can take some time. So these are all ways I do that. I'm not going to go into all of these right now. I'm going to focus a little bit on what I call mindfulness. It's more paying attention to yourself. And so this involves paying attention to our thoughts, our feelings, body sensations, and our urges or behavior. So let me describe what I mean here. So thoughts. So here's something I ask people to do sometimes. I do use positive affirmations with people once we get further along in this work. Because my deal is, well, why do there have to be all these books about positive affirmations? Oh, because we all have IBS. We don't know how to do that. We don't know how to speak well of ourselves just naturally. We have to learn it. And so cognitive work, if I can identify my thoughts, okay, so sometimes I'll ask a person, go at home and look into your own eyes in a mirror and say, I love and improve myself. And they'll go, what the hell? Why would I do that? That's crazy. I go, oh, there's your first thought to work with. So then we can do cognitive work with that thought. And then I ask people, take a breath.
Wait a minute. That's not how it works. You're supposed to just accept that's a crazy thought.
Yeah.
You're just supposed to accept it.
Right. Oh, sure. I mean, you can if you want to. Feel free.
Oh my gosh.
Accepting those thoughts wasn't helpful to me finishing my degrees and having a life.
That was
so
brilliant.
Then, if next you take a breath and you tell me, where do you feel tension in your body? Because very often people can't identify. They'll tell me a feeling word for when I ask them, what do you feel in your body? So where do you feel tension in your body? Okay. So now do some deep breathing. Do some movement work, do something that works with your body. Go play some sports, go get on the treadmill, and focus on your breathing and letting go of that tension. And just be aware that your body gets tense in your stomach if you say, I love and improve myself. It's not the end of the world. It's going to happen. And then also identifying feelings. Oh, I'm mad at you for telling me to do that, Cathy. Oh, good. Anger. Okay. Then we can talk about doing some anger work eventually. What do you feel? What did you feel like doing? I felt like going and eating half a chocolate cake. Did you do it? Yes or no? Okay, no judgment. But if you start using this process over and over and over again, you will change your behavior because you're working with everything that happens. And people go, I can't do that. That's hard. And I'm like, okay, you don't have to, and nothing will change. So when people have been in a cult, they have not been taught in any way, shape, or form to be connected to their body and aware of their tension and their breathing. They aren't asked about feelings. They see some really strong feelings, and the leaders are not allowed to have the same feelings. They're not thought to have an inner dialogue with themselves and identify what are my thoughts about this. And so I found that this is a very, very helpful thing for people who have been in cultish groups for a lot of reasons. It helps people on a lot of different levels. So we're going to have questions and answers here in a minute. Here are a few things that, as I put together this little presentation, I thought, well, where am I at? And what can I put forth to people just as a person about this? I find that consciously focusing on having hope, and I don't mean false hope like you get in those religions. I'm talking about finding something in your life that you can look to that is real, that can give you hope, laughter and humor. Music. Oh my gosh, I got back into my Beatles. I love John Lennon's, God is a concept by which we measure our pain, and there ain't no Jesus going to come from the sky. Those are a couple favorite lines of a couple of his songs on his first solo album after he left the Beatles. Lots of other music. The Cranberries did lots of music that had lines in it that I applied, and it was helpful because it could help me get in touch with my anger, and I get in my car and sing my songs real loud. But you got to have laughter. You got to have music. If you want to have a different life than how you are feeling when you get shunned by people that were once loved ones, you're going to have to find some determination within yourself to do that. I don't know how to do that otherwise. So this is where I say decide and keep deciding. This is a poster I had on my office for many years. I had a mug that said this too. It's not that I never have any thoughts of suicide anymore. Those pathways in my brain are deep, and they're there since I was about 10 years old or younger. But I made a conscious decision that that's no longer an option for me. And so what that does for me is whenever I am in a down place, or I have something that I don't like that's going on, or I'm living in the world, we're back down on lockdown here in San Diego now. And it gives me avenues. It gives me paths. It opens up ways for me to do things differently rather than think about taking my own life. So here are the resources I used. And then this is another list of tools for coping. A lot of different things. I tell people my approach in therapy is not a cookie cutter approach. I have training, and I use a lot of evidence-based, but I'm also very much a proponent of what the doctor I trained with, Dr. Ross, calls the art of therapy. He says, don't forget the art of therapy. It's extremely important. I see too many people kind of stuck on using tools, and then they don't have that art of therapy. So I'll leave those for you to explore on your own. And I will have my script D in a couple days, and I know that you have this up on YouTube, so on the YouTube. So thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you so much, Cathy. That was a beautiful presentation, and I could see in the comments that so many people were really touched by what you said, and that what you said was really, really helpful. So thank you so much.
Sure,
that was amazing.
Yeah, so when you get that link, go ahead and send it to us, because actually I've had a couple of people ask me about the slides, and I was really grateful to hear that you're willing to share them. We've got folks who've got a list of resources that we'll go ahead and put into the chat, and it'll be in the description as well, and there'll be more you can learn about Cathy too. But it is now on to the Q&A session. I'm going to have to do some deep breathing to sort of calm myself down, because Cathy, you just nailed me right in the forehead with it was great stuff. So Amaia, would you mind taking it away while I kind of take a breather?
Yeah, no problem. So the first question comes from someone who has a friend who has been shunned by her family, and it has been quite recent. So they're asking how can they help their friends overcome, this shunning process, which is obviously very painful and traumatic.
Just being a friend and listening. You're never going to understand what they've gone through and they're going through, but you can be there for them. I definitely mentioned, some of the resources. That book Shunned that I mentioned early on is just full. I love it because it doesn't focus on, she speaks from her experience as an ex-Jehovah's Witness, but it doesn't focus on that. The focus is on a lot of tools that can be used to help, for people to help themselves. So continue to be her friend. One of the things that helped me the most when I was leaving the religion was all the what I at the time would have called worldly people, and how they helped me in various ways, both in going to college and just, getting established on my own, without, any help from anyone else, as far as in the religion, because they weren't going to give it anymore.
I really
Yeah.
liked how you worded that. So many times I kind of feel like I should sort of understand where they come from, but when you said you kind of gave me license, like, look, you're never going to understand where they come from, but
Mm-hmm.
you can still help the person. You don't
Right.
have to fully understand where they're coming from in order to just be there for them. So I really, really appreciated how you worded that. You just kind of gave me
Thank you.
permission to just be myself and be there for them. That's cool.
Yeah.
We got another question. I was shunned by my family members, and now I feel guilty about feeling happy and free without them. Any advice on how to deal with this?
So that's what I would call an IBS response. I'm not good
Oh.
enough to be happy. I have to feel guilty. That's how that shows up. And so, working on self-compassion, if you're okay with that. Now, when I say self-compassion, there's lots of good books and writing out there. Some of them have kind of a new agey spiritual basis, but a lot of them don't. So find something that works for you and work on that. Self-compassion. It's different from self-esteem. Self-compassion connects us to other humans. Self-esteem kind of makes me compare myself to other humans, and it's disconnecting. So that's kind of my big answer for that is go back over the, when the YouTube gets up, listen to the part on IBS again and see if you can see how that is manifesting in you, that I'm not good enough stuff. I'm not good enough to be happy. I'm not good enough to be away from them. And also it's a connection thing. It's an attachment thing. It's your family. So you're taught to feel guilty if you do something different from your family, right? Or from the religion. And so just anytime we can be aware, to me, knowledge is power. Obviously, going to college changed my life. And if we can get education and knowledge and understanding about something, then we can start changing it within ourselves. And you won't have to feel guilty. You don't have to. I'm here to tell you, you do not have to feel guilty. I don't. You get to live your life just because you're a human.
Well, that's wonderful.
That's beautiful. Someone else asks, for those who can't afford therapy right now, how would you advise them to deal with those feelings of abandonment and as a starting point until they can get the help that they need?
Boy, well, at the beginning of before I presented, I heard all kinds of wonderful resources that I didn't have a clue that you guys had, support groups online and so on and so forth. And so I'd say take full advantage of what recovering from religion offers. Be careful about Facebook groups. They're often full of people who are venting in anger and very stuck. Again, no judgment. That's just, people are on their own path. But if you want to move forward, find things to read and help yourself enjoy your life now. Find things, even little things, a walk on the beach or in woods down the road or whatever it happens to be. Give yourself joy every day. Give yourself some light every day. It'll start to counteract some of that stuff.
A question that came in that's kind of related to this one is from someone who is going to spend the first Christmas on their own after their family shunned them. Do you have any extra advice for someone who is going to spend such a critical period of their lives or the year?
Holidays in trauma families are usually full of trauma. And when you're not going to spend it with your family, then you have to reclaim these things for yourself. If you can't spend that time with your family, then give yourself someone and somehow to find connection with others, whatever that means for you, and create traditions and whatever you want to call it, patterns around the holidays that work for you and that give you joy. Reclaim those holidays. There's a young woman whose movie I used in trauma work called Searching for Angela Shelton. She also wrote a book about it. Go look it up. It's great stuff. But she recognized at one point that she could never close a bathroom door if she was at a friend's house or out in public. And her brother finally told her, oh, that's where Dad used to take you and hurt you. And so she said, I don't remember that. I don't want to remember anymore. I've remembered enough. But she camped out in her bathroom for 3 days and had tea parties with her stuffed animals and stuff and reclaimed the bathroom for herself. So that's what you do. You don't let these things that you want in your life be taken from you. You reclaim them in some way for yourself.
I love that. It's like rewriting the narrative that you have constructed because of obviously external experiences. I think that's beautiful.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we just got the last minute question that it says, what do you do about being nervous or anxious passing churches?
Breathe. I mean, that sounds very simple. My TED talk in my head is entitled "Breathing Saved My Life," because I used to have panic attacks to the point where when I worked in I don't know if everybody knows what Costco is, but it used to be what's called Price Club. And I was a supervisor and I worked at the front of the warehouse, and I had a panic attack and I got in the bathroom and I couldn't get out of the stall. I would kind of go away, dissociate. They called the EMTs in, and I recognized years later when I was starting to have one of those that what I was telling myself inside, oh no, here I go, I'm going to go crazy again. And I took a deep breath instead of keep hyperventilating. And I said to myself, but I don't have to if I don't want to. And I realized, oh, it's not the outside happening to my inside. It's the other way out. I can manage this. Now, I didn't completely take that away at the time, but it was a beginning of that. And so when I say breathe, I mean, learn to breathe. Go on YouTube. There's all kinds of good breathing techniques. You don't breathe properly, especially if you've been through any trauma, you probably breathe shallowly or very, very little even. And so when you're going by a church, I was married to someone who was in AA the second time. And so I went to Al-Anon meetings, and most of those are held in churches. And it's the first time I'd ever been in a church, because you don't go into churches when you're a Jehovah's Witness, because they are all pagan and Babylon the Great and blah, blah, blah. And so it was interesting for me because I learned all kinds of neat things about things that are in churches that I had no idea about. And I breathed and I just did it, and it became a building to me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We only have time for 2 more questions, so I'm just gonna ask them very quickly.
Sure.
So one of them is, what other religions apart from Jehovah's Witnesses and Scientologists shun other people?
The Amish do that. The Mormons do. There's a woman by the name of Martha Beck. She used to write a column for Oprah's magazine. She left the Mormon church, and she wrote a beautiful book about it. It's just a really beautifully written book. It was very helpful to me. They have various levels of shunning, and a lot of the smaller groups, they definitely, practice shunning. I don't have a big list in my head, but I mean, I've worked with people from all kinds of groups, and sometimes it's not formal. It's like if you have a group of close friends who all kind of do and believe things a certain way, and then maybe somebody starts doing something real different, everybody kind of starts ignoring that person, not inviting them anymore. That's a form of shunning as well.
Islam, Muslims, I think shun
maybe some sects do. Yeah.
And like you were saying, it's doesn't have to be like codified into the religion, but it's just almost like what a natural thing communities do when someone goes against what the community is.
Exactly.
Like, we even kind of do it in American society by putting people in prisons in some sense.
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. That's absolutely true. Anytime we sequester people off somewhere in some way. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, yes, the last question that we have time for today is how does someone come to terms with the fact that they will be shunned in the future? As a student who knows I don't believe in the Jehovah's Witness religion anymore, I'm scared and confused as to when to tell my truth.
Yes. Find people who really will listen to you. And, again, overemphasize some kind of practice of what's called acceptance. I mean, I agree with something that I think is wrong. Acceptance just means I acknowledge this is how it is. I've had many experiences of that in even little ways. When I lived in Iowa, I hate the weather there. And I kept acting like somebody was picking on me every time it snowed, because I didn't want to go out and wade through the snow to get to my classes. And one day I realized, doing this to me. I chose to stay here to go to It's a much better situation than if I went back to San Diego to do it, blah, blah, blah. And so that was my first experience. I didn't even have words for it then, of developing acceptance. I use in therapy now, I use a lot of kind of a little bit more formal process of something called radical acceptance. It's a skill embedded in a certain type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, which you can do your own a lot of. So I would say, find some ways to develop acceptance. This is how it is. I recognize, you know what, I don't go by their rules anymore, but they do.
Oh my gosh.
The very same rules I used to go through,
yeah.
go by. I used to observe those rules. And, I've run into people I used to shun. I've apologized to them and they've been very gracious about it. They didn't hold it against me. But still, it's a horrible thing to do. And now I know. And so, again, developing acceptance, finding people you can relate to, people that will hear you, and finding some kind of support and activities that give you joy.
I think that's the perfect way of ending this session. Quite helpful, so I love it. So thank you so much, Cathy. That was super, super helpful. I can definitely see in the comments that people have definitely benefited from it. So thank you so much.
Sure.
Cool. So I'm just going to let you guys know that next week we are going to come back and we're going to have an RfRx religious series session, which we haven't had in a while, but it's going to be really great. It's going to be about the Seventh-day Adventists, which I must confess I didn't know they existed until I joined RfR. So it's going to be definitely very informative for me because I have no idea of what beliefs they hold or what traditions they perpetuate or anything like that. And we're going to have Ryan Bell and Terry Campbell doing the presentation. So definitely encourage everyone to join us next week. Again, just as a reminder, if you want to watch any of our RfRx sessions, they will be eventually posted in our YouTube channel. And if you want to send us any feedback, any ideas for speakers, or any ideas of topics that you want to see, you can email us at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And Eric, should you introduce our newest board member now?
Yeah, first, before I do that, at the end of every RfRx, we want your feedback. And just like at the beginning, we have an exit poll at the end, and it's anonymous. So we'd really appreciate your feedback, and it kind of helps us guide us as we bring more cool things to you. Amaia's just doing a fantastic job, I gotta say. All right, so to close us out this evening, I want to introduce you to a board member of RfR that you've probably seen in the room here, but you haven't necessarily heard from. So I am so excited to introduce you to Gwen Bloggett. She's an RfR board member. She's a project manager for a huge behind-the-scenes project for RfR, and she's one heck of a person. If you want to learn more about Gwen, we actually have a Faces of RfR video that kind of goes through and interviews her. She tells her story. It's really a lot of fun. But without further ado, Gwen, why don't you say hi and welcome?
Hi, Eric. Thank you. It's great to be here. And wow, what a session tonight. Oh my goodness. Actually, I was sitting here going, I'm getting nervous. I'm not sure if I'm good enough to talk. And then I'm like, oh, maybe that's my Southern Baptist background talking. So really glad to be here. And I've known about RfR for a while. I've been deconverted for about going on 7 years now. I'm becoming getting in there, but been volunteering for 1.5 years and just absolutely am thrilled with the mission of recovering from religion. If you watch my video or know much about me, you'll know that I really wish I'd had even a clue as a teenager that there was something other than the worldview I was raised in, because I had questions, I had doubts. And when I tried to break free from it, I just got sucked back in deeper than ever. And I really think if RfR had been around, I would have deconverted in my teen years. So just love the organization and what it does. And I had an interesting conversation with someone recently about the difference between RfR and a religious group. And Cathy mentioned in her talk that sometimes people, what was the word you used for it, when they hop to a different group?
Snapping.
And, I had someone say to me, they were like, you just changed religions. Your religion's now RfR. And I was like, no, you have no idea, because, a religion tells you what to think. It tells you what you need to do. It tells you how you need to behave. And RfR says, here's the things you need in order to know what your life should be, to know how you want to think, how you want to move forward. And yes, I give my time and I give money, and my company is amazing. We have a matching gift program. So those of you end of year matching gift program, think RfR. You shop on Amazon, choose RfR. But what's great about it though is that nobody comes to you and says, are you really doing all you should? Are you doing enough? Are you sure you really needed to have that extra dessert? That money could have made a difference for a child in Africa. And that to me is what makes RfR different. That's what makes it just a great, as a volunteer, the care for the volunteers is as much as, if not more, than for the people who chat in or who message it. Again and again, someone might say, hey, something came up and I need to, I can't take calls this week. And everything's like, no, take care of yourself. And we welcome you back when you're there. It's just been an amazing, amazing journey. And I'm so grateful for all the people I've met. And that's been the cool part too, is getting to know all the different people. And, it's not sure what else to say about it, except I'm glad you're here. If you haven't, chatted in or talked with someone, give it a try. We've got wonderful volunteers, and we are working on some behind the scenes exciting stuff. So hopefully maybe Q2 2021 in one of these episodes, we'll be sharing some really cool new things we're bringing to RfR.
Gwen, thank you so much. Thank you so much.